fun. So I will be the first to admit, right, that these are strange times, as we've been sort of discussing as we sort of came in from the waiting room, and that this is my first time teaching this kind of class on this platform. So I hope that you will also be patient with me as we sort of sort this out. So I'm in sort of a strange position because I suspect most of you know each other, but that I don't actually know most of you. So I figured I would just allow like a quick round of introductions. And so if you're muting and unmuting people, like right now, I think actually I was like, you all are very quiet who are not muted. So like, I appreciate that. Usually you've got like people in their offices and there's like people yelling in the back and you're like, can you stop washing 3,000 dishes while you, so appreciate this. But just like a quick intro, tell me your name and like why you decided to, you know, come hang out online with me tonight. And then anything else that like you think I should know as we go into this. And then we'll talk about sex in the quarantine. So I'm Brianna Becker, really just Bree. I was like, I have no idea what they sent you about me because I have to be totally honest. I don't know that I got that email. So I have, so I moved here a little over a year ago. And before this was directing Hillel in Appalachia, actually, which was an interesting experience. I have a PhD in higher adult and lifelong education and a master's in student affairs, and then also a bachelor's in Jewish studies. So sort of a mishmash of things. And this is not my research area, but rather like an area where I do a lot of work with students sort of more directly in engaging them in these same kind of ideas with college students. And so hopefully that will translate. So yeah. I don't know what order we should, because I don't know if like you show up in the same order. So if you want to just tell people when it's their turn, Rachel,
sure.
For me.
So I'll go down the list that I have. So
Perfect.
The first person that I have is Al. Al, if you want to share about yourself or what enticed you to join us this evening. Al?
Hello.
Hi, Al, we can hear you.
There you go.
Hi. I'm just adjusting my hearing ability here. I'm not used to this stuff.
No problem. We hear you loud and clear now.
Yeah, but I couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay. Welcome. So what made you decide to join us tonight?
When I was going through the temple mailings, I saw this and I said, well, I'm going to be here for Mincha. So if it's 7:30, I'll wait another half hour and join this.
Perfect. Well, we hope you enjoy.
Bring it over there.
Ashley, what about you?
Seemed like an interesting topic. Rachel told me about it this morning and I thought I'd come in.
Great. Well, welcome. We hope to see you more. Gail?
Oh, hi, everybody. I just thought it was a funky topic, and I've met Bree, and she's a funky lady, so I wanted to hear it.
Okay. Stephen?
Saw it in the email that it was actually going to be happening. Sounded interesting. Gail said it ought to be good. So, and I have to ask, where in Appalachia?
I was at Ohio University, so Athens, Ohio, sort of pressed up against West Virginia.
Yes, it does. Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Rabbi, if you're still here.
I'm still here. And as I said a moment ago, I'm here just to offer words of support, encouragement, and I'm thrilled to see so many people come out to study a little Torah.
Great. Thank you. Well, we hope you enjoy your meeting, and we'll miss you.
Thank you.
And Rebbetzin Elligberg, Jody.
Okay, that was a little weird, but it's fine. Better known as Jody, yes.
Yeah, Rebbetzin are fighting words.
Uh-oh.
Not for me. I have no problem with them. But I actually was interested in this as soon as I saw the catalog, little preview that I got, and I hate to say I'm happy to be home, but in order to watch this, but it is a perk. So I'm looking forward to it.
Perfect. Marsha?
I'm joining because the topic was very interesting. And I said, what else am I doing tonight? But yes, I thought it was going to be a great topic, so I wanted to join in.
Perfect. Gary and Roz? Judd?
Well, I really enjoy a text study. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep, I can
Can
hear
you hear
you.
us? Okay, we really enjoyed text study, and this sounded like it was going to be a very interesting slant, and we thought it would be a fun class to join.
Perfect. Welcome. Les. We have Les and Audrey separate now, so we'll start with Les and then hop over to Audrey. Do we have either of the Fishers, Les or Audrey? All right, we'll come back to you. How about KB?
Looked interesting.
There we
There
go.
you go.
And Lenny will be down after he puts the kids to bed to join me for the class.
Very nice. Well, thank you. And KB is the one who referred Bree to us, so we thank KB for that. Did I
Thanks,
miss
KB.
anyone? I think I had everybody on my list. Oh, Stan. Stan?
Yeah, hi, I just thought it was interesting, and I thought also, in case it wasn't interesting, no offense to Bree, I would just slip out and nobody would ever notice. Now that I'm speaking, I probably can't slip out anymore.
I was like, you totally just busted yourself. Now I'll know.
Yeah, so I'm staying.
Great. Well, thank you. All right, Bree, go ahead.
All right, so I'm hoping we can do this like a little bit of, group effort discussion. I have some different pieces of text and sort of 4 overarching sort of themes of sex in the quarantine, not a typo. I think this is, I have been making lots of quarantine puns because really what else can you do under the circumstances? So, right, we're all here stuck in our homes in the midst of a pandemic. And that's like freaky enough as it is, but it also interesting set of questions, right? Because suddenly we are now all contained in our homes. And for many of us with our spouse or partner, and right, like most sort of traditional text about Jewish sexuality, this focuses very much on sex between a man and a woman inside the bounds of marriage. So, and there are texts that address sort of like non-traditionally normative stuff, and we will, if you join me later in like future stuff, because this is not a single thing, this will be ongoing, we'll address this, but sort of in an unsurprising way, right? These ancient texts are very much oriented towards a fairly traditional kind of family structure. So with that caveat, right, things to sort of know about this, right? I use both like traditional academic language and also some colloquial language to talk about sex and bodies. This shouldn't be shocking. I don't think I'm gonna teach anyone any new dirty words or anything, but just sort of an awareness. I have no idea which of you knows what, right? So some of you have knowledge bases that are totally different than mine. Some of you are probably like able to engage with the Hebrew in ways that I cannot, right? Like I'm not my Hebrew's not good enough to translate directly. So that's something to think about too as we look at this. We'll be working in the English. If your Hebrew's super strong and you have something to bring out from the Hebrew, feel free, like as we talk, to bring that forward. I'll try to explain things as I go, right? If I think something is maybe not a familiar topic, but I want to encourage everybody to like, if you have a question, if something doesn't like fit, if you're missing like the definition of a word, just say something, right? Like that's fine. And if I don't know the answer, which I might not, right? Like I'll find it for you. So if you see me again, I will come back with an answer to something, assuming there is one. Once in a while, they're like not a real answer. There's just like more questions because this is Judaism. So, and then the other thing I'd like you to like all be kind of percolating a little bit as we talk is, since the intention is to make this sort of a somewhat ongoing in the oddity of our lives where we just all operate out of our homes, that if there are topics sort of under this general umbrella of sex and Jewish texts, not particularly about the quarantine, I don't think I'm going to return to this topic, but if there's things you'd like to discuss, there may be time at the end of this to share that with me. If not, I think Rachel is going to like reach out to folks to sort of collect ideas, because I'd like to design, right? Like I've been doing a lot of reading and collecting stuff, but I want to make sure that I'm sort of designing things that people are interested in, not just that sort of entertain me. So there are sort of 4 big questions about sex in the quarantine that we're going to address, or at least dig into, right? Like I don't expect us to have answers, because even some of these texts disagree with each other, because again, this is Judaism. So one is, and you're already starting to look, you'll see this as like when I share my screen in a moment, is, right, should we be engaging in sex at all during this time? Right, like what does it mean during a crisis to engage sexually? And is that something that Judaism allows or doesn't allow for? If no, I guess we could like terminate after the first text, but we're gonna roll out with the if yes possibility after that. That doesn't need to be the conclusion we reach, but that's where the rest of the text leads us. The questions of how often, of when, and of what's allowed to happen, sort of generally. So let's see if the tech here works for me. I believe that when I press this button, can you guys all see?
Bree,
Yes.
is your Safaria source sheet just available that we can just log on to Safaria?
I can make it available. This is what yes, it's going to take me a moment. Give me 1 second, folks, to pause this, and I can do that too. That's why
Yeah, we had discussed it. The problem is we have just a few registrants, and we obviously were hoping and are glad that we had a lot of walk-ins per se. So we'll send that in the chat any moment. So if everyone wants to take a look in their chat, it'll be there.
Yeah, give me just like 1 second, because I was like, now this is many things happening on one computer screen and just one me. So, and I appreciate that you're not all having to stare at me typing. I think you're being spared that. So appreciate you all sticking around for the weirdness of the technology, because it sure is weird. All right, here we go. Here is the sheet. Here's the question. How do you make it shareable? I guess that's my question. So now I'm just back where
You
I
can
was.
just copy the URL for it and send it in the chat function of Zoom.
I think it's not set to public yet, but okay, let's see if that works. Chat function, where have you gone?
Stanley, while she's doing that, where are you, in Florida or in Albany? Stan? You didn't hear me.
Yeah, I had to unmute myself. Somebody muted me.
Are you in Florida or in Albany?
Albany.
Ah,
My grandfather clock is in Albany.
well, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking.
I was thinking it's one of the nice things about Zoom, if you were still in Florida, that you could join us from Florida.
It's true. I could have. But I'm here, so I can get out and see all my friends.
I'll come wave by your house.
Okay.
Rachel, okay, I feel ridiculous because I use Zoom all the time, but this set up very differently than I'm used to when I screen shared. Where is the chat now if I'm on screen share? Does anyone know?
So you should still see the toolbar. Here, I'll message you. I'll put a message. Should get a pop now.
Down at the bottom, bring your mouse all
Yeah,
the way.
I don't have it down at the bottom. So right, like this is already, that's why I'm stopping to be like, this is, I have the screen seen. So like at the top, it's the top of my screen. And normally I am not tech unsavvy. This is why this feels
You just have to stop screen sharing in order to see it.
Oh, all right. That would be the problem.
Good.
That is exactly the problem. You can only see one or the other, correct? All right, glad somebody knew. So does this work? If this works, we have a simple solution. If it doesn't work, I need to figure out how to set it to public. And that has not been terribly clear. Let's see if I can do that quickly.
It looks like it's opening. I have the topic.
Is it?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, excellent. That's reassuring, actually. Super. So then everybody can get in and see that themselves momentarily. And you can see mine still too, right? So like if this is not useful to you to like to open it up yourself, like it should be visible momentarily on mine too. So let's see. I think this will do it. All right, so now you should be back to being able to see my screen, and then also should be able to access this yourself. All right, awesome. So, all right, back to where we were. This is like, let's pretend that part didn't happen. Sorry, people who are watching this after the fact that you just got to watch that long interaction with Zoom. So this brings us to our first text. And I am happy to read to people if they want to be read to, but often I'm happy to take reading volunteers for the English. I was like, I am very impressed if you want to muddle through the Hebrew or your Hebrew is solid, but in the English. Do I have a volunteer?
I'll be happy to read.
Thank you.
So I'm guessing the first one, yes?
Starting with to say to the prisoners. Yeah, the Midrash.
Yeah, okay.
Tehumah, yeah.
To say to the prisoners, go forth, implies that they were enjoined from sexual intercourse. Why was that? When the world is overwhelmed by suffering and destruction, men are forbidden to fulfill the command to increase and multiply. Surely, while the Holy One, blessed be He, is engaged in destroying the world, men should not strive to populate it. Joseph behaved accordingly. He indulged in intercourse with his wife only prior to the years of hardship. As it is said, and unto Joseph were born 2 sons. When were they born? In the years preceding the famine.
So this was not a familiar text to me. I found this when I was looking through stuff that folks were collecting around text around the pandemic itself. Wanted to sort of open this up to you all, right? So what does this mean for us now? Because this is a very unusual, right? Like, right, Joseph is looking at famine. We talk about war, but pandemic is, well, it certainly would have existed before because our understanding of things like germ theory is very new and understanding that like we need to be apart from one another to stay well. Jews had a slightly stronger understanding of that than the average population, but not the way we have with modern science. So what does this mean now, right? Because we're, whoop, tech fail, whoop, 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 whoop. There we go. What does this mean for us, right? Because it's this very interesting dichotomy of, right, clearly, there is destruction in the world at the moment. It's hard not to see that, particularly for those of us who are sort of proximate to Metro New York. But also, we're stuck in our houses with very limited human interaction. And so I'm curious to see what folks think, right? Like, what do we think? Is this about our times? Do you see this as relevant?
Everyone has been unmuted as well, so please chime in.
Well, this assumes major bad stuff on the part of God. You know, that and I mean the whole point of the rainbow post Noah was that, well, okay, I tried it and I'm not going to do it again. So there's, from that, Judaism pretty much takes, no matter what's going on, an optimistic view that it'll be better in the future. This is not following that script.
Definitely.
So I guess this is saying that he was only having sexual intercourse when things were still okay and not when it was a time of famine.
Right.
Okay. Well.
For me, one of the questions it raised too was how we know whether God is destroying the world or something else is, right? How you parse that or if that's parsable. right? As we think about whether, right? So one is this an outdated worldview that comes with an older time in our people? That's an interesting question. And then does this fit under this thing, right? Is engaged in destroying the world. Do we see it that way? That isn't, so I was like, for my theology, that's not how I see this.
I think another issue, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yep.
Okay. I tend to have audio or computer problems.
Right
But
now, you're doing well.
Don't hold your breath.
I won't.
To me, one of the issues is that that maybe instead of following the mitzvah to increase and multiply, that there are other issues that we should be worried about. Pikuach nefesh, bikur cholim, whatever else, taking care of the deceased, so that other commandments are more vital than increase and multiply.
It felt very, this is like a funny thing to say, but it felt in some ways very like millennial, that like generationally millennial, the idea that like you would hold off on having children because the world was so messed up, is like a viewpoint you hear a lot from folks in their 20s and 30s. And I have no idea if teenagers are also espousing this, but that sort of the youngest generation of folks, the people who like sort of are now coming into their second recession of their adulthood, that you also hear them sort of, not with the God part, right? Like in a very secular way, talk about not populating the world when it's being destroyed.
Bree,
yes,
if I can say something.
Absolutely.
It mentions Joseph in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph is a good example of a prisoner who should not have been a prisoner. So
yeah,
he was falsely accused. That's the reason he was in prison. So it shouldn't be disallowing, multiplying should not be applied to him as a prisoner when he was falsely accused and shouldn't not have been in prison in the first place.
Right. Right. Joseph has his own story that's tied up in this too. So do you think, interesting, so are you saying, yeah, please. Did I lose someone?
Okay, I was just waiting till you were finished, Ann. This is coming from probably from the boomer perspective, not the millennial, but it seems to me that one of the responses to the Khorbans of the past, to the total annihilations of the past, has been an implosion of new Jewish children. It's the reaction to the Holocaust being one of them, where one of the ways of making sure that the Holocaust did not achieve its aims was that a large number of new children being born. So it seems to me that what you mentioned before, making God responsible for the Khorban in the first place is very problematic. The second place, of course, it seems to me that what you really want when things have been bad is to make sure that life continues afterwards.
Yeah. And I think, I want to note about the text is that the text only notes that sort of while it's happening. So if we're using the pandemic as the example, right? It would be while we were sort of in an active pandemic, if we're using the show as the example, right? During those years, but after 45, partway through 45, right? This would obviously, I think even in the most literal reading of this shifts, right? Because it's not like Jews are never supposed to be fruitful and multiply again because there was once a trauma. So let's go ahead and assume that we're Jews and we're not going to give up on the fruitful multiply, and that we're also Jews, so we're not super like shamey about sex. It's not really our thing. So which brings us to, I should bring us down to the English so we can see all of it. If you are preferring to read in Hebrew, you have it. So this is actually the Rambam commentary on this, but it's the middle piece that I want to pull out. But the commentary around it's useful. But so we're in a very interesting moment, right? We are now, most of us, right? I don't know in this group necessarily, but like in the population at large, some portion of us are in fact still engaging in our jobs, and they're very high risk. And we could do a whole separate study about like, what does it mean if you yourself are we could look at lots of the rules around disease, but that's sort of a separate question. But for the bulk of us, especially where we are, we've just been in our houses. I'm assuming your lives have been much like mine for the last 6 weeks or so, and you've been seeing lots of the inside of your house and maybe your yard. And one of the ways that the Torah sort of delineates how often men need to have sex with their wives. Today it would just be, their one wife, but could have been more than one back then. That has to do with what they do for a living. And not because like rich guys can have more or better sex than poor guys or vice versa, but because depending on what you did for a living in ancient times, depending on how often you were home. There's some element of truth even in modern careers, but less extremely because, cars and planes move a lot faster than camels and donkeys. But this piece here, right? So we're coming in the middle, I'm going to read because I'm making someone pick up in the middle, which is just like a terrible, mean thing to do. That for men of leisure, right, their obligation to their wives is every day. So for laborers, twice a week. For donkey drivers, once a week because, they're gone, but not that far because donkeys, I guess, don't go that far. For camel drivers, it's once in 30 days because if you like drive camels, you're going long distances. They're long distance transport. And for sailors, even longer transport, once in 6 months, right? So it is right, this sort of understanding that basically your sort of proximity to your wife and your free time helps you to like delineates your minimal obligation, right? So like Judaism does not forbid the camel drivers from doing it more than once a month. That's their bare minimum obligation. And so this opens an interesting question, right? Because suddenly nobody's gone. And there's exceptions to this, right? If you drove a truck in this day and age, like you actually still would be like a camel driver or at least a donkey driver, right? You'd be gone for big chunks of time. But the bulk of us have suddenly now retreated to our homes. And if we have a spouse, we're probably stuck in that house with that spouse. Now it sounds like Dr. Seuss over here. And sort of raising the question, does that make us all men of leisure? And so has our obligation, not mine because I'm a woman, but has men's obligation to their wives suddenly skyrocketed from where it was 6 weeks ago?
You are working from home, then you are by virtue not a man of leisure because you still are working from home. However, being in a proximity like this, it does afford one more time to be much more attentive.
Okay, I'm a little jealous. Someone has a dog and now I kind of want to see the dog, but
the dog is an English Springer Spaniel. She's barking at my husband who just came home from work.
I was like, I'm just having dog jealousy.
So I have to say, I just watched Unorthodox, so I have a whole different take than what you were talking about.
I also watched Unorthodox recently.
This is about making babies.
Mm-hmm.
If you read through the whole thing, it's not about couple intimacy. It's about the obligation to make babies. And if you're leisure, it's a higher obligation than if you are not around, because at the bottom they compare the females to animals.
That's commentary. That's not the original text, right? That's
right. But the commentary that the rabbi has is that Rashi has is to compare the act to the procreation that animals do. It's all about the outcome of the sexual act. It's not about the sexual act itself. So that's what strikes me. And I would say it also depends on how you define work. Like if you're not employed, if you're laid off or furloughed, but you're home with your 3 kids or 4 kids or 1 kid, then that, does that qualify as work or does that not qualify as work in terms of contemporary times?
Right. That's an interesting. This whole structure is about men and men's work, right? There's no acknowledgement of, right? Because like, what do you do today if the wife is the camel driver?
Correct. That's my point.
Right. No, I know.
Yeah. So, it's just, so I would agree with KB, but I would also expand the definition of work.
I would agree with that.
And if my dog comes in, I'll hold her up to the camera.
Okay, I just love meeting other people's pets. If my cat appears, I'll introduce you guys, but he's not very social. The other thing I thought was like really sort of that like Gail, you're sort of touching upon that this text brings up, and you see it in many of the texts from anything except very modern stuff, is this balancing on this very narrow edge between prioritizing reproduction, which I think comes out as the dominant theme, though I think you could make a counter argument, and prioritizing sort of intimacy and pleasure, which is for, like, if we compare it with other kinds of, modern religion, seems actually sort of interestingly progressive. But the hyper focus on procreation makes it not so much. So sort of this interesting, but you can sort of see that razor edge all the time in the Jewish texts about sex between men and women, is sort of where the priority is and how you sort of encourage baby making by making this appealing. I'm
sorry, at the end it says if you're on a long journey, you get 2 for the price of 1, so to speak. Right? The donkey who goes on long journeys can have 1 at home and 1 on the journey.
Oh.
To the donkey who goes on long journeys, it gave 2 females to the male.
Yes. I don't know if they're actually intending to set humans up that way, because some of these exceed the number of wives Jews are allowed. But
how many wives are we allowed?
I don't remember, but I think 4 exceeds it. Anyone? Experts? Rabbi, you still here? No.
There is until recently 6.
Okay, so this is
Sephardic world, that custom and allowance persisted until certain elements of the Edot HaMizrach came to the land of Israel, and those who had multiple wives were grandfathered in, whereas in the Ashkenazic world, beginning in the 10th century, Takanat Rabbeinu Gershom limited spouses to 1.
Right.
And that has been the Ashkenazic custom for the last millennium or so.
Okay, so at the time that most of that they're writing back on, you could have actually had all 4 wives then, from Torah times. So I don't think most people had 4 wives. That sounds complicated. But no, you're right that is what this is implying. And there's if procreation is your goal, there's some logic. If intimacy is your goal, maybe not so much. So, as I note to look towards time, as we move down in the text, sort of creates this interesting question. And the next several texts are actually all sort of iterations of this question. And I think this is a fascinating thing because, everyone's home all day now, and we have electrical lighting too, so our nights aren't necessarily dark inside our homes. So does someone want to read for me the Nida 16b11?
I will, unless somebody else would like to. All right. Rabbi Yochanan says it is prohibited for a person to engage in intercourse by day. Rav Hamnuna says, what is the verse from which this is derived? As it is stated, let the day perish on which I was born, and the night on which it was said, Eve is a man-child. It is derived from here that nighttime is meant for conception, but daytime is not meant for conception. Reish Lakish says that the proof is from here, but he who despises his ways shall die. One might see something unpleasing in his wife in the daylight and come.
So isn't this in direct opposition to the requirement to please one's wife?
Potentially, if your life is into daytime sex. Yes. So let's do them all together so that we could like pull together the difference. So the next one down is also, or same theme. Can I get a reader?
I'm happy to read if no one, but does anyone else want to read? Okay. The Gemara asks, why did he need to tell them to separate during the morning hours? Didn't Rav Huna say the Jewish people are holy and do not have relations during the day? It was not necessary to command them until night. The Gemara replies, it was necessary to tell them in the morning, as Rava said, if it was a dark house, it is permitted to have relations during the day. And similarly, Rava said, and some say that Rav Papa said, a Torah scholar obscures the light in the room with his cloak and is thereby permitted to have relations during the day. Therefore, it was necessary to command the people to separate even during the daytime hours.
All right, and so this is the last one that's sort of the same theme.
Anyone else?
Are you my designated reader? I appreciate it.
I guess. Okay. Rav Hista says, it is prohibited for a person to engage in intercourse by day, as it is stated, and you shall love your fellow as yourself. Leviticus 19:18. The Gemara asks, from where is this inferred? Abaye says, if one engages in intercourse by day, perhaps the husband will see some repulsive matter in his wife, and she will become repugnant to him, which will cause him to hate her, and he will thereby violate this mitzvah. Rav Huna says, Jews are holy, and they do not engage in intercourse by day.
I think a lot of people are having a very similar reaction to this set of texts that I did. And I pulled this partially because, right, suddenly everyone's home during the day and it seems sort of very relevant to our moment. And partially because, what? So, and I think this is sort of a fascinating idea, right? That somehow seeing your wife might be so dangerous that it would ruin your marriage?
Good question.
She will become repugnant.
Hey, we had a question. Who's the question haver?
Yeah, it's Les Fisher. The question I have, if you're newlyweds, is there a different standard?
I think by these, I think no. You still have to have night sex, I guess. Because your wife might be gross.
Doesn't it say that you can create the night by covering the windows?
Yeah.
Aren't they all Torah scholars? And couldn't they all just cover the windows?
Well, so that's an interesting question. So where's that's the top one. Wait, go.
So a man never sees his wife, only in darkness.
That does seem to be what's implied in this text.
Right.
which is interesting because like we have other texts that I don't have here, but that also like Jews typically are instructed to be nude for sex. That dress sex is like a perverted pagan practice, which I think is funny in its own right. But right, so you're right, sure. And today, this is like an interesting question, right? Because like today we can both make it light whenever it's dark. And we have like a million ways to create darkness inside if we wanted to, right? Like all you'd have to do is buy some blackout curtains and they'd probably be even more effective than a cloak. I am curious what folks think this says about marriage more broadly, right? Because this is clearly something that the rabbis are concerned about, right? This is many people weighing in about no day sex.
Well, one thing is that the day starts in the evening. So evening sex is actually having sex at the beginning of the day and starting your day off with something that's a mitzvah. Just, you know, just to put that out there.
That was a very positive spin. I like that.
I am really quite curious. Most of the Gemara reflects what was going on at the time in which the Gemara was written. And I'm sort of curious as to what was happening at this time period that would have resulted in the need for the rabbis to feel that they had to have these particular restrictions. It must reflect something that was common to that time period. Clearly, we don't know about it.
That's actually an interesting, I have no idea what like would have been going on that they would have been so freaked out about day sex. And one of the things that like you see, and if you come visit me again, you'll see is like the rabbis are really horny, like weirdly, by modern standards, sometimes like weirdly horny, and will often like are tempted in ways like there's midrashim where they're like tempted in ways and behave in ways that like make them seem like they must all be 14-year-olds, right? They're like so overcome by desire, and these are often like, I mean, they're grown men, they're not boys. And it's sort of interesting because they're, and in the text, it's not treated as particularly, I mean, sometimes the individual sort of moment is treated as embarrassing, but like the overarching sort of overwhelming desires and then the need to curb them, even though some of the desires, like for my experience as a modern human being, like don't sync with reality, that's sort of an ongoing theme, is that the rabbis have like, I in my, like, as I was reading stuff for this, several of the pieces that were published in more mainstream publications about sort of Talmudic, mostly Talmudic mainstream, like Jewish sex texts, they were like, we can't reprint this in this publication because actually the English is too dirty, right? Like the rabbi's text is too inappropriate. It like didn't make like the Jewish journal like language cut off. So I think that's sort of this interesting thing, right? A lot of this is, it's not the text most of us engage in regularly, but this is pretty tame. Some of it is much more graphic than this. And so, right, so we bring us, so continue to ponder why it is Jews can't have unholy day sex. I also have questions about why day sex is just unholy, period, but I guess that's like for a later time. Though actually, I guess I'm curious, right, like what is it about, right? This seems to be that like a general understood norm, right? Because Jews are holy and they don't engage in intercourse by day.
I would say one thing is because you're supposed to be working during the day.
Oh,
okay.
But what about men of leisure?
And men of leisure, the woman then is taking care of the house.
Oh, so it's in a, right, so then he'd be bothering her.
Right, but it also, think about it, is somebody's telling you how often you should have sex, when you should have sex, and all of a sudden it's not up to you. It's up to the text.
Yeah.
The rabbis would have halachot about everything if they were given their druthers, I'm sure.
Oh, yes.
to the point of the timing, when you talk about what's going on in the era, and you talk about the kind of sexual practices that were happening in the era at the time, there was a proclivity for public houses or public areas where people would be engaging in this kind of behavior. However, it does go against some of the other, these particular rulings, they do go against some of the other rulings about go out to your spouse in the field, go out to your spouse who are shepherds, you know, in that way, such that you can procreate and keep things going. And again, also the halacha of satisfying your wife. So there are a lot of sort of dichotomous conversations here that go along with it and should be taken a little bit with a grain from the commentary part of it.
Yeah, and I think you can see that like even in modern, in like today's discourse around this, right? That like this, there is some rejection of some of this. I was like, I don't bring his stuff out because he's not a scholar I particularly attached to, but Shmuley Bo teach, right? So like someone who's almost everyone's familiar with, right? Is like, yeah, if you want to go out and have public sex with like your partner, right? Like it's as long as it's your married spouse and like you are not transgressing anything else, go on with your bad self, basically.
For the context of the time, apparently the public is looking for some answers. I assume that the spouse, the male spouse, is away for a long time period, and they're looking for what is the appropriate thing to do halakhically. So they bring the entire system into play with some guidelines, because life is different than here, as you mentioned up front, traveling and all. So there's a worrying of the rabbis, there's a worrying a bit of the general population that studies, at least most of the population didn't. And I think that's coming into play here. They just want answers to some major concern, and the rabbis are providing those answers.
Well, it separates marriage from sex. That's one of the things that this text, I believe, does. It separates the relationship of two married people from the sexual obligation. And I think that also what Roz said, I think it was Roz, about this reflecting the times is really appropriate, because the rabbis came together from different communities, and their commentaries reflected the communities that they came from. And different communities, even in that time, had different standards. And we have, our rabbis have also discussed, it's like the rabbinical whatever, you know, they come together and they talk about, well, do we really want to sacrifice animals anymore? Nah, we don't really want to do that anymore. So we are going to substitute this into the prayers. So but I do think it separates that working relationship that's a marriage from the obligation of sex. And it protects the marriage.
Yeah. So, which actually seems like a perfect segue to like this last piece of text. So on the topic of forbidden intercourse, similar to the sages forbade a man to have marital relations while thinking of another woman, nor may he initiate sex while drunk, nor out of spite or hatred, nor may he rape her or initiate sex while she is afraid. Nor may they have sex while either of them are excommunicated, nor after he has decided to divorce her. If the husband does any of these things, the children will not be proper citizens, but brazen, rebellious people and criminals.
Whoa.
This spoke to me particularly for this moment because in very close quarters with no escape, which is an unusual way for people to live. For all of us, this is probably, you know, our first time at the quarantine rodeo. Right, we know from modern sources, right, like of what's happening right now, that conflict, sort of regular conflict between couples is up, right, just like regular fighting and snipping, but that also, right, like violence in the home is way up as people are trapped in their homes. And it's sort of interesting, right? Like this is a very clear text. And unlike many of the, like the preceding ones, for me, except for maybe like what's going to happen to your children as the punishment, which, right, like has this sort of prophetical sort of edge to it. The rest of it carries over as, seems pretty solid even as advice for today, which feels very different than like the don't have sex in the daylight or like this many times if you drive a camel. Does this read as a text that like does it play the same way for other folks? Does this feel like it has modern applicability in the same way? And then the second part is that last sentence. Why that?
You mean the excommunication piece? Which?
No, I actually mean the children will be punished.
Oh, the children. Okay.
No, the last part makes sense. Yeah, go.
The unusual thing about the last text is it's really the only one that gives any value to the woman.
Yes.
The others, they're talk about the male and the male's responsibility and just assumes the woman is there regardless. This one is the woman a sense as an individual.
Yeah. Which is a much less common perspective in Jewish texts, right? You can see who our authors were.
Yes.
I think the implication also is the reason for the last sentence is to make it clear that when these kinds of things happen, there really are frequent repercussions for the children who grow up in a household of that sort. And I think that may be part of what the rabbis were suggesting.
Yeah.
Also, having just watched Unorthodox again, sorry.
It's in my brain too.
There's a phrase where Esty says, in our community, children are the most precious thing and family is the most important thing. And certainly there's a lot of future generation stuff that we read about. So I think it's the ultimate threat.
That's what I think
too.
The
most precious thing will not be accepted if you do these. It's quite a large consequence.
Yeah.
Sorry to bring up Unorthodox, but
no, it's okay. I saw Unorthodox during the quarantine also, so like have also had it on the brain.
We also apologize for seeing something.
I'm sorry, what?
For seeing something orthodox or reading something orthodox.
Unorthodox is a 4-part series on Netflix about a young woman who leaves the Satmar sect in Williamsburg and flees to Germany. And so you learn a lot about how the Satmars, what they believe in the way that it's put together. So in her part of her explanation of that community, there's 2 things that struck me. One is that they feel part of their purpose is to replace the 6 million. But then the other thing that she says, because she has difficulties getting pregnant, is children are the most precious thing in our community. So being a wife and a mother is one of the best and most rewarding things you can do because you are shepherding the most precious thing that there is. So I mean, it's an interesting series. Some people have liked it, some people have not, but if you have Netflix, you should watch it.
Yeah, I was like, I enjoyed watching it. It's complicated and problematic in some ways, but like worth seeing. Not that I was like, I'm not here to shill for, Netflix, but they're doing fine without me. So I want to be mindful of time because I think folks are just expecting to be here about an hour and we're coming up on 9. Are there things, right? So like I've thrown a lot of text at you. I have sort of situated it in our weird current moment. But also, right, like you can see this as relevant to our current moment, as totally irrelevant to our current moment, or as just sort of interesting historical sort of documentation of where we were, right? Like, I don't remember if I said this earlier, right? But like that a lot of the daytime stuff is, as much of the Jewish sexual practice stuff is in reaction to the people around them and their sexual practices. As many of our religious like stuff is based on not doing what other people do. So,
I think they're still asking the same questions today in a different context again. And maybe not the same, but back then, and maybe even now, some people always recognize or feel, which I don't, that the male is basically the active species for procreation. The female is passive. That was a comment somewhere in the Talmud. I don't know. Rabbi, help me out. In any event, a lot of things have changed with egalitarianism, and certainly it changed with modernity. But we're still asking the same questions in terms of the violence in the home increasing, in terms of the current problem with the viruses. Yes, there's more increases of interpersonal violence. There's more increases of suicides. There's more increases of kids getting into poisons in these types of environments, and we have to continue to ask the questions in a different framework.
Does anyone have any like final thoughts, questions, things that this has tied together or taken apart for them?
Or I think, as Bree mentioned earlier, if there's anything from this topic that you're interested in diving into deeper, or anything different that you're interested in on the topic, like Bree said, she's open to building this around you.
Yeah, so that's like that was going to be my sort of final thing is, are there sort of topics, either narrow topics, right, text people would like to like deep dive into, or sort of more broad topics that people would like to, under the sort of the large umbrella of sex and Jewish text, that folks would be interested in talking about or encouraging others to come talk about, or both, in the future. Because I want to make sure that like, if I'm spending the time to do this, that I'm actually creating things that people are interested in. This seemed timely, so.
Really good, can hear. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
A lot of the content here really focused on sort of, negative commandments, for lack of a better word. Are there any sources available in what we're looking at tonight that deal with positive ones?
So I actually think that there are that this text is traditionally understood as a positive text.
Well, yeah, it's 2 donkeys.
So I am. Notice my cat, right? The way I qualified that. I'm not suggesting I'm like sold by this, but particularly less the commentary, right? So I maybe have like, I feel like I like distracted people with the commentary. It was just a more straightforward, they didn't have a good cut from this for just the Genesis Rabbah. So like, that piece, right? Like, that like the actual Torah piece I think that has historically been, and when I have been taught this in the past, that like the obligation for frequency was seen as a positive. I'm not selling that as a strong, you can tell that I'm not doing a hard sell on that because I'm not sure I'm convinced, but I think that that text is understood that way normally.
Let me
the rest of this,
my,
not so much.
Let me clarify what I was saying a bit.
Yeah.
I was really saying more like this focuses on what not to do as opposed to what we should do. This really focuses on what we should do.
Right, like, so there's all kinds of commentary around a married relationship. And what does that mean? What does sex and intimate relationships have to look like? Like we were talking about earlier, that is sex in Judaism for the sole purpose of, if sex in religion is seen as being for the sole purpose of procreation, then why are we permitted to continue to have sex long after procreation years? Well, it's because sex is also for intimacy. So there are all kinds of halachot that go along with that, and what does that look like, and how do you sexually satisfy your partner when the ruling is X versus Y? And, you know, and in our modern era of the availability of so many other stimulants, what does that look like today? I think would be, yeah.
That's another comment if anyone doesn't want to comment first.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm very much involved with liberty and freedom issues right now, in contrast to, what should we say, more things that are on the safety field, the conflicts between the one and the other. And I think the rabbis provide us with a guidance, maybe from their own time period, that there always a conflict between these types of values, but there are standards, and for modernity, we don't like standards too much in many cases. We rather just do our own thing and have the freedom to do it and challenge anybody or any government or anybody else that tells us what to do. That's the conservative thing. I'm not challenging the conservative movement and the conservative political movement, that is. But I think it's important, again, that they set the example of what's really important, and they're discussing it, and they probably don't answer the question either entirely.
So I would like to see a variety. I agree with KB and Lenny. It would be nice to see some of the early discussions about intimacy and marriage, but also I'm curious about Dina. I'm curious how she was raped, but then they wanted to make it right by her and they slew all these people. You know, so I'm curious about some of the Bible stories that indicate some kind of intimacy or sexual activity. That story is really, you know, to me, he tried to make it right from what I know of the story, which may or may not be true, but everybody got killed.
Right.
And I also think one of the interesting things that we talked about tonight was about, you know, is God responsible for what's going on, or are people? And I'm personally watching this and thinking that first text, this is not about God, because if it was about God, they wouldn't be saying that Los Angeles has the world's the best air quality in the world right now, because 80% of the cars are off the road. So if our actions, and the animals are thriving, so you know that interrelationship with God is also something in these activities, is something that interests me. Now I don't know if that's too broad, but and then again, if we were going to have one focus, I probably would choose what Lenny and KB was talking about. If you can just do one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think we can do more than one over time, potentially. So like there's lots of possibility here. And folks are also welcome, right? Like if you're like tomorrow, you're like, I read this thing and now I would like to talk about this. Like you should feel free to get in touch with Rachel or with me. Do folks have, I'm looking at the time and my computer says it's just past 9. So I want to be like respectful, though I imagine people are, I don't know, perhaps you have lots of Zoom social plans after this. I don't want to make any assumptions. So is there anything else folks want to just sort of final requests for future things, final thoughts on what we talked about tonight? Any sort of final parting things? Does anyone have anything they must announce? Anything seems possible?
I want to announce that there's more programs coming up, not just here, but 2 more programs starting at the beginning of May. Please help us with your word of mouth to get the word out about them. It's really hard. It's really hard in this cacophony of mail and things to make sure the word about our scholars and our programs get out. And maybe Rachel, you can add what they are, because I don't have that in front of my face.
So starting our first class is Steve Stark-Reamer, teaching about the archaeology and history of ancient Israel, which will be Tuesday evenings at 7:30. And then starting, that was May 5th that starts. Starting on May 6th is Lucia Fanato from University at Albany, who will be teaching Jews in the world of Islam. And again, these will all be taught via Zoom. You can register the same way. Some of you have already registered for them, so thank you. We'll be sending out those links closer to the start date. But again, like Gail said, Gail, thank you. She is our chair on adult education. We would love your help spreading the word. We'll continue to do so. And like Bree said, if you have any thoughts, I put my email in the chat box. So please feel free to send them my way. We'll pass them along to Bree. If you have any questions or thoughts on this, I can obviously share Bree's contact with you as well. She's okay with that.
And also, thank you, Bree. This has really opened up a topic that's, oh, there's a cat.
Ooh, not even my cat, a new cat. Hi, cat. You look sort of like my cat. Oh.
So when is the next class?
Good question.
So Bree, does a week give you enough time now, given some thoughts and where direction from the crowd on where they'd like to go?
I think so. So yeah, tentatively, yes. I think a week should work. I need to double check my actual calendar to make sure I'm not like freakishly cross-scheduled, but that should work. So, and if we want to push it out a little, like I will leave that to you. I need at least a week, but anything from a week or longer, I should be able to swing, no problem. I really appreciate everybody coming. I know Zoom is like a weird format and we're all sort of learning to do things this way. I still feel super awkward and I'm never making eye contact because if I look at your eyes, I'm not looking at the camera, which we've all probably experienced already. So I appreciate you sort of being part of this, and I hope folks will choose to come back because my experience is particularly with topics that are a little like, you know, spiky, that the more folks get to know each other, the easier it is to talk. And so I'd be happy to see you all back here, but I appreciate you coming, even if it's just for the once. And thanks for inviting me.
Appreciate you coming. Thank you.
We can have more people. We can have more people also, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This isn't a locked group. If we end up with huge groups, somehow if I become the most popular person of all time, which like would be really fun, but unlikely. If we get a huge group, I'll probably use some of Zoom's functions to break people into little groups and bring them back. So that, because having a discussion with huge groups is unlikely, but no, I mean, we could easily do this with like twice as many people. Yeah. So bring your friends, bring your enemies, but don't bring them in person unless they already live in your house.
What Hillel are we working for? What Hillel?
Oh, I was the director of the Hillel at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. So like the far eastern edge of Ohio up against West Virginia.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think I should release you all into the wild unless Rachel or Gail, you have anything else.
Yeah, thank you, Bree.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Bree.
Have a good night.
This will be.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Be safe.
Gail.
Keep well.
Gail.
Yeah. Huh? Stanley.
Where did you go? Yeah.
I'm here.
Gail, this is not quite relevant to this, but you were talking about unorthodox. Earlier.
Oh, do you want me to talk a little bit about it?
Well, I saw it, but it didn't finish. There's lots to go, and it stopped.
Yes, I did some research about it, and the book was actually just until she left the Satmar community, and the second half of it was what you would call literary license, about how she fit into Germany and what her activities were. But the first half of the story definitely matches what happened to the author of the book, Unorthodox.
So the book itself is actually, from what I understand, it was part of her dissertation originally. And as we all know, in Orthodoxy, people tend to not just follow what the Satmar community or the Lubavitch community or whatever, but they follow specific rabbis in their community too. So her experience was very tailored, not just to the total Satmar community, but the Satmar community in that community that followed their specific rabbis as well.
In Williamsburg.
I know a fair amount of Satmar women who are having a problem with the book, not because she's wrong, not because it's her story and that she's telling secrets, but she's wrong about a couple things that are not the same in other Satmar communities.
Okay.
There's a whole series of movies. If you have interest, there's also a set called Makimi, which I'm not sure. I watch Amazon and Netflix. I'm not sure which it's on. Makimi takes place in Israel in the 1990s when Rabin is assassinated. It's about a secular woman who falls in love with a man who becomes Baal Tshuva, extreme Baal Tshuva, and she is faced with a dilemma about whether to follow his practices or whether to separate from him. And their bond is very strong. So she travels into this world of extreme orthodoxy, and people are talking about Shitzel, which is yet another viewpoint. And I think it's Sirugim, S-R-U.
That's like the Israeli Friends.
I know. I really love that because it's contemporary Israel, and the women all have careers. They're all, it's about people who are like my kids, excuse me, because I'm so old. They're like you, Brie. And,
I'm not offended.
So, so there's a whole series. I found Unorthodox very interesting. The second part where she enters is clearly made up. They have agencies that for people who leave Orthodox communities, they actually help them with transitions because going into the secular world is such a huge shock. And I think some of them actually return to their communities because they really can't make that transition into the secular world. But it's called Unorthodox. It's on Netflix. I agree with you, Stanley. Are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very unfinished at the end. It makes you wonder if there's going to be a season 2.
So what I've read is that there's not going to be a season 2, but there's been so much hubbub that I'm wondering if they're going to reconsider. If you're interested in what happened to real life Deborah, the actual person, not Esty, she has a second book, Exodus, that I haven't read, but that is, I think, about her life after she leaves, because her leaving is much slower than Esty's. Like the real person's leaving is gradual, not sudden, and actual, like the Unorthodox, I think, sort of covers her sort of much more gradual departure into secular life. And then she just released another book. And even she has had some trouble. Like she didn't make the movie part. And the author has sort of expressed that like there are creative decisions she would not have made. Like she doesn't seem overall displeased, but the sort of clearly made up second half is clearly a made up movie plot as opposed to like a real person's life.
When someone sells their books to be filmed, they give up rights. They give up rights to the story.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. This one was pretty complete, I think, in that sense. Yeah. Some people stay on.
If it's negotiated that way.
Right. Yeah. Right. This was one where she really just sold the rights in full. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a scenario like that. So, and she doesn't seem angry, and people were very careful in sort of representing the Satmar community like in a way that was supposed to be accurate. Obviously, I think there's people, right, lots of, like what KB said, lots of different feelings. And then also you can hear from the people in her real life who have now written some response pieces that are accusing her of a more outright kind of lying, which is also an interesting question.
That's interesting. Shitzel is kind of like a film version of The Chosen by Chaim Potok. It's about an Orthodox person who doesn't have problems with being Orthodox, but is an artist. So it takes him to places he does not expect to be, and it's yet a different take on all of it. But in all of it, the sex is very much what we just studied, very obligatory.
Yes. Yeah.
I am Potag. I forget which, you have to help me out, which book he wrote that starts off standing with baseball and how he becomes secular based on the baseball games that he's playing with his friends. You recall which book that was?
Oh, that's The Chosen. The artist one is My Name is Asher Lev, I think.
Yeah.
That's The Chosen with the baseball. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's always about this conflict between what the obligation is and what where the heart takes you. I think anyway, there's always that conflict. So I've always been happy that we can say, no, we are going to give you the choice of accepting LGBTQA as full members of your community, that we can change, that we can make things happen based on community standards.
Yeah, and I think interestingly, actually, in the ultra-Orthodox world, you see that happen also just in some ways in different directions as there's additional layers created to protect halakha, right, the mechitza around the mechitza, that you start to see practices that are actually out of sync with sort of normative Jewish values. And I think if you've seen Unorthodox, the sex scenes in Unorthodox pretty much are a clear example of like taking the sort of negative pieces and making them all the pieces. I don't think that was not a sell for that show. Sorry, it's really actually pretty good, but that part's upsetting.
Bree said that that the parts of the unorthodox that are after she runs away was clearly made up. I didn't realize that. I thought it was all part of her life, so I didn't know that.
Yeah, I've gotten really into it and I've like joined some online communities that talk about it. And what has been fascinating for me actually is that the incredible interest from non-Jews, right? Like non-Jews are just fascinated and like are hopping on the internet to discuss this at like great length with each other and with Jews, because they're like, I think for a lot of non-Jews, Satmars were a thing they like didn't know existed really before this, and so and then it was super promoted by Netflix, and so now everybody's seen it because they were stuck in their house.
One thing that stood out for me as a Jew was that the two Hasids, the Satmar, when they were mistaken for Israelis by the hotel clerk, one of them muttered Zionists. I just wasn't used to the idea of they were disgusted by Israelis themselves. It's just a bad thing to me.
I'm personally a little concerned that we're focusing on a standard that doesn't exist. It didn't exist back in the biblical times. The thing called orthodoxy. That's a rather new viewpoint. So is conservative, so is reform. We're talking about biblical Jews. And to me, at least, the conservative movement was created because they are more flexible, and the Orthodox viewpoint is not ours, and we don't use it as a standard, as a high looked-up standard in many cases, although they support the community in terms of kashrut, etc. It's not what we are, and to use the standard of the guidepost of what's Orthodox and what's not Orthodox is completely, for me, argumentatively, irrelevant. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll also add, if nobody's seen yet, I would definitely suggest The Beauty of the Baker. So
what was that?
There's also a new series that just hit NBC, I think, called The Beauty and the Baker, which is actually off of an Israeli sitcom. And to me, the Israeli version is so much better. That one is in season 3 now, I think. And here in America, they've just done 2 episodes. But it's also, it goes a lot with it.
Is the Israeli one available subtitled in English anywhere?
Yeah, so I want to say that I watched it on Hulu.
Okay, yeah, I can look. I if it's on one of the streaming services, I'll find it.
I'm gonna stream that because I just streamed the whole thing and binge watched it. But it's amazing. And on that note, I will add, I'm gonna look into. There's a new concept that people are talking about where it's a Netflix watch party.
Mm-hmm.
And we can share a movie and watch it together and then discuss it and things. So I'm going to look up and see what kind of films or series like that are available that we could all watch together. I know on Netflix there's a ton of good Israeli ones, and like Bree was referring to, most, if not all of them, have subtitles. So.
And I would also add, in terms of at least the Orthodox and the Reform, being a conservative person but raised within an Orthodox shul, that what we see is superficial. That people who choose to live that structured and defined a life in terms of what their obligations and roles are, there's actually a richness that can be found that they find in living that life. It's not all negatively structured, I guess I want to say. People choose to stay there. Some of them don't, and some of them don't like it, just like some of them, I mean, we have a big variety, but there's also a lot of richness that happens within the community in the ways that they can support each other.
Thanks, Bree.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Okay.
The Baker and the Beauty in Hebrew is on Netflix.
Okay. Cool.
No, is it?
What was it?
It's on Netflix?
Yeah, I just did a quick look to see what it streams on. And it's also on Amazon, it looks like.
You're talking
Okay.
about the Baker and the Beauty?
Yeah, the Israeli one, the Hebrew one.
I'll watch it too. I've only got 30 days for free.
Talking about orthodoxy again, my comment basically again is that there are many different forms of orthodoxy, and the extreme of orthodoxy or the extreme of any other basis is not the same as a one-book story. We have orthodoxy that doesn't care about the rest of the world. We have orthodoxy that's very much involved with the rest of the world. Similarly, we have conservative that are the same way. So the whole rainbow of Jewish values. And before you end, Bree, I want to find out if you knew my daughter, who's at Hillel MIT, executive director Michelle.
Yes, not well, but I've seen her at conferences and like seen her speak once. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't think she knows me. Like she's a bigger deal than I am.
Oh, I'm sure she know you.
So, all right. So
Thank you all. So stay
Yeah, thank you.
with Bree, and it looks like we'll go forward with next Wednesday at 8. But if
sounds
something
good.
changed, I'll let everyone know.
Okay, and
Thank
thanks
you.
for staying for the meeting after the meeting. That rarely happens in a digital format, so that was fun. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Take care.
Good night.
Laila Tov.